The Pacific Northwest has long been sold as America's last frontier of livable paradise, towering evergreens, breathtaking coastlines, and cities that promise the perfect blend of urban sophistication and natural escape. But beneath the Instagram-ready vistas and craft coffee culture lies a real estate market that's become a slow-burning fuse, ready to devastate unprepared homebuyers. Property taxes are skyrocketing at rates that outpace income growth by staggering margins. Insurance costs have doubled, sometimes tripled in markets vulnerable to wildfires, earthquakes, and flooding. Meanwhile, entire municipal budgets are buckling under pension obligations and infrastructure decay, turning once stable neighborhoods into financial quicksand for anyone signing a 30-year mortgage. The gap between what homes cost and what they're actually worth, when you factor in climate risk, economic volatility, and population exodus, has never been wider. Major employers are pulling back, remote work is scattering populations, and the tax base is eroding in real time. What follows are the 9 Pacific Northwest cities most at risk of turning your home purchase into a financial nightmare, as the region's structural vulnerabilities become impossible to ignore. Number 9. Vancouver, Washington. On the surface, Vancouver looks like a savvy buyer's dream. Portland's amenities without Portland's income tax, newer construction, and a steady stream of families fleeing Oregon's tax burden. In reality, Vancouver has become a pressure cooker of artificial demand propped up by a single fragile advantage that's already eroding. Oregon closed tax loopholes in 2024 that previously allowed Vancouver residents to avoid income tax while working across the river, and the state is now aggressively auditing cross-border workers. Property values surged 47% between 2020 and 2025, driven almost entirely by tax arbitrage that no longer functions the way it once did. The city's infrastructure, roads, schools, water systems, was built for a population 2/3 its current size, and the tax base can't support the necessary upgrades. The average homeowner in Vancouver now pays $4,800 annually in property taxes, up 38% since 2022, with additional levies pending for school construction and transportation projects that could push that figure past $6,000 within 2 years. Traffic congestion has reached critical mass, with the I-5 bridge replacement project estimated at $7.5 billion, creating uncertainty about future tolls that could cost commuters $3,000 annually. Insurance premiums have climbed 52% since 2023 due to wildfire risk from the Cascade foothills, and FEMA flood maps expanded in 2025 to include 4,200 additional properties near the Columbia River, triggering mandatory flood insurance that averages $2,100 per year. The city's employment base is dangerously thin, heavily dependent on healthcare, retail, and construction sectors that are all contracting as interest rates remain elevated and consumer spending weakens. Median household income sits at $78,000, barely enough to qualify for the median home price of $585,000 under current lending standards, creating a market sustained by speculation rather than fundamentals. When Portland's economy stumbles, and it will, Vancouver won't be a refuge. It'll be the first domino to fall, leaving buyers trapped in overpriced homes in a city built on a tax advantage that's already vanishing. Number 8. Spokane, Washington. Spokane has been marketed as the affordable alternative to Seattle, a place where middle-class families can still afford a yard and a garage without selling their souls. Beneath the surface, Spokane is a Rust Belt economy in evergreen drag, propped up by retirees, government jobs, and a medical sector that's consolidating rapidly while the private sector withers. Home prices jumped 41% between 2021 and 2025, reaching a median of $425,000. But median household income barely budged, sitting at $61,000, a gap that makes home ownership mathematically untenable for anyone without substantial savings or dual incomes. The city's economic base is alarmingly narrow. Healthcare accounts for 28% of all employment, and when Providence and Multicare, the two dominant hospital systems, announced merger discussions in late 2025, the prospect of job cuts and consolidation sent tremors through the local economy. Manufacturing, once a pillar, has shed 3,400 jobs since 2020, and the vaunted tech sector remains a mirage. Spokane has fewer than 2,000 tech jobs, compared to Boise's 12,000 and Seattle's 180,000. Property taxes have increased 29% since 2022, with voters rejecting school levies twice, forcing the district into program cuts that are already damaging property values in affected neighborhoods. The city's infrastructure is crumbling. Water mains installed in the 1940s are failing at accelerating rates, with emergency repairs costing the city $18 million in 2025 alone, and estimates suggest $400 million in upgrades needed over the next decade. Homeowners insurance has spiked 44% due to wildfire smoke damage claims and increased windstorm frequency, with some carriers pulling out of Spokane County entirely. The homeless population has tripled since 2019, concentrating in downtown and spreading into residential areas, dragging down property values and creating quality of life issues that are driving out the very young professionals the city desperately needs. Spokane's population growth has already stalled, just 0.4% in 2025, and when retirees stop arriving and healthcare consolidates, the city will face a brutal reckoning. Too many houses, too few buyers, and no economic engine to prevent a sharp plunge in home values. Number 7. Tacoma, Washington. Tacoma has spent 2 decades trying to rebrand itself as Seattle's gritty but cool little sibling. Affordable waterfront, a revitalized downtown, and just far enough from the tech chaos to feel livable. Dig a little deeper, and Tacoma remains what it's always been. A port city whose economy runs on supply chains that are fragmenting, whose tax base is eroding, and whose social problems are metastasizing faster than any urban renewal project can contain. The median home price hit $525,000 in 2025, up 39% from 2021, driven almost entirely by Seattle's spillover that's now reversing as remote work allows buyers to skip Washington's tax burden entirely. The Port of Tacoma, which directly or indirectly supports 35% of the local economy, saw container volume drop 11% in 2025 as trade tensions with China intensified and shipping routes shifted to Southern California and East Coast ports. Automation is eliminating longshore jobs, projected to cut employment by 22% through 2030, and nothing is replacing that income. Property taxes have surged 34% since 2022, with additional increases baked in for school construction, homelessness services, and climate resilience projects that could push the average bill to $7,200 annually by 2027. The city's violent crime rate is 89% higher than the Washington state average, concentrated in neighborhoods where median home prices have actually declined 8% since 2023, creating pockets of negative equity and abandonment. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge toll increased to $7.75 in 2025, with another hike to $9 planned for 2027, effectively adding $5,000 annually to the cost of commuting to Seattle, a death sentence for Tacoma's appeal as a bedroom community. Insurance costs have exploded, with earthquake and flood coverage now mandatory in 62% of Tacoma's residential zones, adding $3,800 per year on average to ownership costs that already strain household budgets. Environmental contamination from a century of industrial use makes large swaths of the city unbuildable or subject to expensive remediation, limiting housing supply in desirable areas while undesirable areas decay. Tacoma's population grew just 0.2% in 2025, and school enrollment is down 7% since 2020, a harbinger of demographic decline that will hollow out neighborhoods and leave homeowners holding depreciating assets. The city is caught in a vicious cycle. It can't afford the services needed to attract stable families, so it raises taxes, which drives out the tax base, which forces more cuts and more taxes. When the next recession hits and the port contracts further, Tacoma won't just stagnate. It will unravel quickly, leaving homebuyers trapped in a city that promised reinvention but delivered only the same old decline in a shinier package. Number 6. Salem, Oregon. Salem presents itself as the sensible choice, Oregon's capital, affordable by Portland standards, with state government jobs providing stability and a central location offering access to mountains and coasts alike. In reality, Salem is a government town watching its raison d'etre crumble as Oregon's budget crisis deepens, and the state's political dysfunction becomes a spectator sport of incompetence. Home prices have climbed to a median of $465,000, up 36% since 2021, while median household income sits at $64,000, barely keeping pace with inflation and woefully inadequate to support current valuations. State government employment, which accounts for 31% of Salem's workforce, faces brutal cuts as Oregon's budget shortfall hit $3.1 billion in 2025, with governor's office projections showing deficits exceeding $4 billion annually through 2030. Layoffs have already begun. 1,200 state workers in 2025, with another 2,000 projected through 2027, and each lost job reverberates through Salem's fragile service economy. Property taxes have increased 31% since 2022, with voters approving a $300 million school bond in 2024 that will cost the average homeowner an additional $680 annually through 2044. The city's infrastructure is a disaster. The Willamette River levee system is rated high risk by the Army Corps of Engineers, with flood protection upgrades estimated at $180 million that neither the city nor state can afford, leaving 8,200 properties vulnerable to catastrophic flooding. Homeowners insurance has spiked 48% since 2023, with flood coverage now mandatory for 22% of Salem properties at an average cost of $1,950 annually. The city's homeless population has quadrupled since 2019, overwhelming shelters and spreading encampments into parks and residential streets, driving down property values in affected neighborhoods by 12 to 18%. Crime rates have surged, property crime up 29% since 2021, violent crime up 17% as budget cuts hollow out the police department and social services collapse under demand. Salem's economy has no diversity. State government, healthcare for state workers and retirees, and retail serving the same shrinking base. When state employment contracts, everything collapses. Population growth stalled at 0.3% in 2025, and school enrollment dropped 6% since 2020, signaling demographic decline that will crater demand for housing. The city is caught in a doom loop. Deteriorating services drive out residents, which shrinks the tax base, which forces more cuts, which accelerates the exodus. Salem's entire value proposition rests on state government stability, and that foundation is disintegrating in real time, leaving homebuyers to inherit a collapsing city whose only employer is eating itself alive. Number 5. Eugene, Oregon. Eugene sells itself as the progressive paradise, University of Oregon culture, stunning natural beauty, a commitment to sustainability and livability that attracts idealistic young families and retirees seeking community. Beneath the surface, Eugene is an economically stagnant college town whose budget is imploding, whose tax base is eroding, and whose quality of life is deteriorating so rapidly that even diehard locals are questioning whether it's livable anymore. The median home price has reached $498,000, up 42% since 2021, in a city where median household income is just $58,000, the worst price-to-income ratio in Oregon outside Portland. The University of Oregon, which directly or indirectly supports 40% of the local economy, faces brutal cuts as state higher education funding collapsed by $280 million in 2025, forcing layoffs, program eliminations, and enrollment caps that will shrink the student population by an estimated 15% through 2028. Each lost student means lost rental income, reduced retail spending, and fewer service jobs, a cascading failure that's already evident in vacancy rates that hit 14% for commercial space in 2025. Property taxes have surged 37% since 2022, with additional levies pending for police, fire, and homeless services that could push the average bill past $6,500 annually by 2027. The city's homeless population has exploded, up 240% since 2019, overwhelming every service and creating encampments that have taken over parks, greenways, and entire neighborhoods, driving property values down 15 to 22% in affected areas. Eugene's response has been catastrophic. The city spent $47 million on homelessness services in 2025, up from $12 million in 2020, with zero measurable improvement and taxpayers funding an endless cycle of crisis management. Crime has spiked. Property crime up 34% since 2020. Vehicle theft up 68% as the police department operates at 73% staffing and response times have tripled. Insurance costs have exploded, with homeowners' policies up 51% since 2023 due to theft claims, vandalism, and wildfire risks from surrounding forests. And some carriers have stopped writing new policies in Eugene entirely. The city's economic base is catastrophically narrow. Education, healthcare, and government account for 64% of employment, with virtually no private sector growth, and tech jobs remaining a rounding error. Population growth has reversed. Eugene lost 800 residents in 2025, the first decline in 4 decades, and school enrollment has dropped 11% since 2019, a demographic signal that can't be ignored. The city is trapped. It can't cut services without accelerating decline, but it can't raise revenue without driving out the tax base. Eugene's entire identity rests on livability that no longer exists, leaving homebuyers to discover too late that they've purchased into a city that's devouring itself, where the gap between progressive ideals and brutal reality has become a chasm that no amount of bike lanes or recycling programs can bridge. Number 4. Bend, Oregon. Bend is the Instagram dream. Powder skiing, craft breweries, and downtown charm that convinced tens of thousands of remote workers and retirees that paradise was real and available for purchase. In reality, Bend is a resort town masquerading as a real city, built on a tourism economy that's contracting, propped up by outside money that's drying up, and facing environmental and infrastructure crises that will devastate property values when reality intrudes. The median home price hit $712,000 in 2025, up 53% since 2021 in a city where median household income is $71,000, a ratio that makes ownership possible only for cash buyers, retirees cashing out equity from California, or the dwindling class of tech workers still earning Bay Area salaries. Tourism, which directly supports 38% of Bend's economy, declined 9% in 2025 as recession fears curtailed discretionary spending, and hospitality employment dropped 12%, sending tremors through the service sector that props up everything else. The city's vaunted brewery scene is consolidating. 3 major closures in 2025, and retail vacancy rates downtown hit 18%, the highest since the 2008 financial crisis. Property taxes have increased 33% since 2022, with additional levies passed in 2024 for affordable housing and transportation that will cost the average homeowner an extra $940 annually through 2038. Water is becoming the existential crisis. Bend's aquifer is overdrafted. Groundwater levels dropped 7 feet in 2025, and the city has imposed new development restrictions that will crater land values while failing to solve the underlying problem. Wildfire risk has exploded. The 2024 fire season saw 42,000 acres burn within 20 miles of Bend, and insurance costs have spiked 64% since 2023, with some policies now costing $4,500 annually and certain high-risk zones uninsurable at any price. The city's infrastructure can't handle its population. Traffic congestion has become nightmarish. Schools are overcrowded and underfunded, and the hospital is at capacity, forcing serious cases to be airlifted to Portland or Boise at ruinous cost. Bend's economy is a house of cards. Tourism that's fading, construction that's collapsing as interest rates bite, and retiree spending that will evaporate when portfolios shrink. Population growth, which hit 4.2% in 2022, slowed to 0.6% in 2025, and building permits collapsed 58%, signaling that the boom has ended. The city has no plan B, no industrial base, no corporate employers, no economic diversity beyond selling lifestyle to outsiders who are increasingly staying home. When the next recession hits, Bend will face a catastrophic convergence: tourism collapse, construction freeze, retiree exodus, and a housing market built on speculation rather than fundamentals. Homebuyers will discover that they've purchased a dream that was always unsustainable, in a city that's running out of water, running out of insurance, and running out of the outside money that made the illusion possible in the first place.
Number 3. Portland, Oregon. Portland once symbolized everything the Pacific Northwest promised: creativity, progressivism, natural beauty, and economic opportunity wrapped in a package that felt both sophisticated and accessible. Dig a little deeper, and Portland has become the region's most spectacular failure, a city that destroyed itself through ideological extremism, governmental incompetence, and fiscal mismanagement so profound that recovery seems impossible. The median home price sits at $548,000, down 6% from its 2022 peak, but still grotesquely overvalued given the city's deteriorating fundamentals and accelerating exodus of anyone with options. Downtown office vacancy hit 34% in 2025, the highest in the nation, as major employers, Nike, Columbia Sportswear, Adidas, Intel, slashed Portland headcount or relocated operations entirely, eliminating 14,000 jobs since 2023. The city's vaunted tech sector has imploded, employment down 27% since 2022 as companies flee Oregon's tax burden and regulatory hostility for business-friendly states like Texas and Tennessee. Property taxes have surged 28% since 2022, with Multnomah County proposing additional levies for homeless services, preschool programs, and climate initiatives that could push the average bill to $8,900 annually by 2027, the highest in the Pacific Northwest. The homeless crisis has become a humanitarian catastrophe. 8,200 people living on the streets in 2025, up 310% since 2015, with encampments controlling entire neighborhoods, parks, and business districts, rendering vast swaths of the city uninhabitable and unwalkable. The city spent $136 million on homelessness services in 2025, up from $31 million in 2019, with outcomes that have only worsened, a monument to incompetence that would be darkly comic if it weren't destroying lives and property values. Crime has exploded, murders up 207% since 2019, car thefts up 122%, retail theft so rampant that major chains have closed dozens of stores, creating retail deserts that further degrade neighborhoods and crater property values. Portland's population declined for the third straight year in 2025, losing 9,400 residents, with school enrollment down 14% since 2020, a demographic collapse that signals the city's death spiral. Insurance costs have spiked 47% since 2023, with auto theft and property damage claims driving premiums to levels that rival major metro areas with triple Portland's income levels. The city's tax base is eroding catastrophically. 58% of downtown commercial property is now worth less than its assessed value, creating a looming reassessment that will shift burden to residential owners or forth brutal service cuts that will accelerate decline. Portland's entire economy was built on its livability premium, the idea that people would pay more to live here because the quality of life justified the cost. That premium is gone, replaced by a dysfunction discount that's only beginning to be priced in. When the city's budget crisis forces mass layoffs of municipal workers, when schools close, when basic services like police and fire face cuts, the market will finally confront reality. Portland isn't a temporarily troubled city waiting to bounce back. It's a failed experiment whose collapse will leave homeowners holding assets that won't recover for a generation, if ever.
Number 2. Seattle, Washington. Seattle has been crowned the Pacific Northwest's economic powerhouse, home to Amazon, Microsoft, Starbucks, and a tech ecosystem that seemed to promise endless growth and prosperity. In reality, Seattle is a city that sold its soul to big tech and is now discovering the price as corporate dominance distorts everything, affordability collapses, and the very success that drove growth becomes the mechanism of its downfall. The median home price reached $891,000 in 2025, up 44% since 2021, making Seattle the second least affordable major city in America after San Francisco, a comparison that should terrify anyone paying attention. Amazon, which directly employs 80,000 in the Seattle area and indirectly supports another 120,000 jobs, announced in late 2025 that it would shift 15,000 positions to Nashville, Austin, and remote locations, triggering immediate panic in a real estate market propped up entirely by tech salaries. Microsoft, facing its own restructuring, cut 8,000 jobs globally in 2025, with 2,400 of those in the Puget Sound region, and signaled more cuts to come as AI automation eliminates entire job categories. Property taxes have increased 32% since 2022, with Seattle voters approving levies for transportation, housing, and education that will cost the average homeowner an additional $2,100 annually through 2030. The city's homelessness crisis, while smaller than Portland's in percentage terms, is just as visible and intractable. 13,300 people on the streets in 2025, with encampments in parks, under freeways, and in greenbelts that were supposed to be Seattle's natural escape valve. The city spent $194 million on homelessness services in 2025, with no measurable improvement, and taxpayers funding an endless cycle of temporary shelters, cleared camps that immediately reform, and services that address symptoms while root causes proliferate. Crime has spiked. Property crime up 26% since 2020, with organized retail theft so pervasive that downtown has become a retail wasteland, and car prowls averaging 92 per day, making parking a car in Seattle a near guarantee of broken glass and stolen belongings. The city's infrastructure is buckling. The West Seattle Bridge remains partially restricted after emergency repairs costing $175 million. The viaduct replacement created traffic nightmares that cost commuters an estimated $840 million annually in lost time. And the light rail expansion, originally budgeted at $54 billion, is now projected as $72 billion, with delays pushing completion into the 2040s. Insurance costs have exploded. Earthquake coverage, mandatory for most mortgages, averages $3,200 annually, and windstorm and flood policies have increased 41% since 2023 as climate risk reprices. Seattle's entire economy is a monoculture. Tech accounts for 37% of GDP, and when tech contracts, and it is contracting, everything collapses. Population growth slowed to 0.4% in 2025, down from 2.1% in 2019. And for the first time in decades, more people left Seattle than arrived, a trend that will accelerate as remote work eliminates the need to suffer the cost and dysfunction. Seattle's housing market is built on an assumption that tech growth is infinite and that $200,000 salaries will forever underwrite million-dollar homes. That assumption is dying. When Amazon and Microsoft complete their optimization, when AI eliminates another 30,000 jobs, when remote work exodus accelerates, Seattle will face a reckoning. A housing stock priced for incomes that no longer exist, a tax base dependent on companies that are leaving, and a quality of life so degraded that even high earners are questioning why they stay. The city that defined Pacific Northwest success is becoming its greatest cautionary tale, and homebuyers entering now will learn the hardest lesson, that buying at the peak of a bubble built on corporate dependency isn't wealth building, it's financial suicide with a view.
Number 1. Boise, Idaho. Boise exploded into national consciousness as the pandemic migration darling, affordable, business-friendly, with mountain access and a charming downtown that made it the promised land for Californians and Seattleites fleeing high taxes and urban dysfunction. Beneath the surface, Boise is the Pacific Northwest's greatest housing trap, a medium-sized city whose infrastructure, economy, and civic capacity were overwhelmed by growth it never planned for, creating a powder keg of overvaluation, resource scarcity, and social tension that will devastate late buyers when reality finally intrudes. The median home price hit $598,000 in 2025, up an absolutely staggering 89% since 2020, in a city where median household income is $68,000, a ratio that makes Boise less affordable than Seattle when you adjust for local wages. This isn't organic growth reflecting economic fundamentals. It's speculative mania driven by out-of-state money that's already drying up. Home sales volume collapsed 34% in 2025 compared to 2022, and inventory has spiked 127%, signaling that the music has stopped and buyers are vanishing.
Boise's economy is alarmingly fragile, heavily dependent on construction, which is collapsing, healthcare, which doesn't pay enough to support current home prices, and state government, which is fiscally constrained. The tech sector, hyped as Boise's salvation, employs just 14,000 people, barely 4% of the workforce. And companies like Micron, the region's largest tech employer, announced layoffs of 1,100 in 2025, with more coming as semiconductor demand softens. The city has no economic diversity, no Fortune 500 headquarters, no research universities driving innovation, just a service economy that supported 230,000 people and is now expected to support 380,000 without the infrastructure or tax base to make it work. Property taxes have exploded 41% since 2022, with additional increases baked in for school construction, water infrastructure, and transportation projects that could push the average bill past $5,200 annually by 2027, devastating for buyers who stretch to afford homes at inflated prices. Water is Boise's existential crisis. The Treasure Valley aquifer is overdrafted, snowpack is declining due to climate change, and the city imposed strict water rationing in 2025 that limits new development and threatens to crater land values while failing to address overconsumption by existing users. Homeowners insurance has spiked 58% since 2023 due to wildfire risk. The Table Rock fire in 2024 came within 3 miles of neighborhoods, and windstorm damage from increasing severe weather events. The city's infrastructure is catastrophically inadequate. Roads built for 180,000 people now serve 380,000. Schools are overcrowded and understaffed, and the hospital system is at capacity, forcing serious cases to be airlifted to Salt Lake City at crushing cost. Boise's population growth, which hit 4.8% in 2021, plummeted to 1.1% in 2025, and building permits dropped 64%, signaling that the boom is over and the hangover is beginning. The social fabric is tearing. Longtime residents resent newcomers for destroying affordability and traffic, while newcomers discover that Boise isn't the utopia they imagined, but a sprawling exurb with all the dysfunction of the places they fled and none of the amenities. Homelessness has tripled since 2019. Crime is rising, and political divisions are intensifying as the city's rapid transformation creates backlash that's paralyzing governance. Boise's housing market is built on a lie that a mid-sized western city could absorb unlimited migration without infrastructure investment, economic diversification, or resource management. That lie is collapsing in real time, and homebuyers who purchased at the peak will discover they've bought into a market that was never sustainable. In a city that can't support its current population, let alone continued growth, with home values that will crater when out-of-state buyers finally realize that $600,000 for a house in Boise, Idaho was the greatest sucker bet of the 2020s housing bubble.